Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week with an album review where we check out a full album track by track, exploring what each song does in isolation and its part within the greater work. Today we're going to be checking out the Italian symphonic death metal group Fleshgod Apocalypse. This isn't the first time we've dove into them. I've done a couple of isolated reactions. We've also done some stuff on live stream for them. I'm fairly familiar with their style. This is their latest album, 2019's Veleno. I looked that up and I believe is it Italian for poison or venom, something along those lines. So that's interesting. We have 11 tracks ahead of us. 2 are seemingly interludes, rather short songs. One only being a minute long and the other one being just under 3 to wrap the album up. So it puts us at 9 traditional length songs, 51 minutes total. My guess is we're probably going to be here for about 3.5 hours. So grab some snacks, get some water, find a comfy place to sit or lay down. Let's dive into this, kicking it off with the first track, Fury. Yeah, got a triplet polyrhythm over there on the ride. Yeah, that ride bell just cuts through the whole production. Every time it comes up, I'm just immediately drawn to it. I don't think I've noticed that before. That little idea over here on the right from the guitar. We also had, yeah, that metallic clanging. What is that? Okay. Bringing in the strings to augment that guitar line. That does sound like it moved right into the next track, but I've already paused it, so... Whoops. Let's just talk about this, though. I like to stop after a first track anyways. This is death metal. And, you know, I knew that going in, right? Like I said, we've listened to some Fleshgod in the past. I've never listened to any of it on my own, I don't think. No, I don't think I have. But I'm familiar enough with their work to know that this is pretty much what I should be expecting for the entirety of the album, and it is what I was expecting going in. Now, it is a bit more furious than I was expecting. The title of the track is Fury, though I think a lot of the speed and aggression of the song leans more towards a personification of this. That's not to say that we won't hear anything of this intensity again later in the album, but I do think it is a bit faster and more technical than I typically associate with them. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it does seem to line up with Fury. So I'm seeing the parallels there. Now, as I said, this is death metal. Death metal is one of those genres that's very riff-based. You sort of live and die by the riff. A lot of iconic riffs have come from death metal. And so I'm really glad, but equally surprised at just how important the riff is in this track, in the album so far. When it comes to symphonic music, in general, even looking at some of the most prolific bands within the genre, the riff and the symphonic elements tend to be at odds with each other. You usually get one or the other, while the section that isn't being featured is being ornamental or usually atmospheric or foundational. That is to say, usually you'll have a really cool classical style idea with some guitar idea underneath it, and maybe even just one note creating a rhythmic idea to just give it that harsh metallic feel. Or the opposite is you'll have some sick guitar riffs going on and then some string or choir chords being played around it. One of them has the focus. That didn't really happen here at all, and I'm very surprised by that. Just because the guitars were absolutely thrashing out at these speeds and playing these really sick riffs doesn't mean that we weren't getting melodic piano lines or moving string sections or anything like that. Sure, there were some sections that leaned a bit closer into this where maybe we had string chords around a metallic section or something like that, but for the most part, they seem to work connected, congruent with each other in a way that embellished what each was doing. You got the prettiness of the strings and the choir and the epicness that they bring, but it wasn't just because of the timbre. They were also doing things compositionally that is going to lean into that, but you also get the aggression, the raw power and strength and rule of cool stuff coming from the guitar work. All of this happening in tandem, and I find that to be, I mean, honestly overwhelming in some sections, but it's a nice change of pace too. I don't ever remember, this is what I said when I don't think I've heard that before. I don't remember making this statement in previous Fleshgod reactions. But it's something that stood out very clearly in this album, and maybe it's just that their older works, they sort of leaned into the traditional styles of mixing metal and classical music, and it's sort of a one or the other idea, and this was the album that they decided to break through. Maybe this is the only song on the album that has this cohesion between the two sides, but it's very clear right here from the start of the album, at least, that they're not to be treated separately, and that they can both have the spotlight at the same time. And as I said, it's very overwhelming. There is a lot of stuff happening pretty much all times on this. For 4 minutes of music, 4.5 minutes of music, it felt incredibly long, very dense track. And I think a lot of that comes down to how much is happening at any given time and how much of what is happening is in parallel to other things that are happening simultaneously. Raw skill. I was going to make this section just about the drum work, but honestly, everybody's sort of on this level, particularly again because of the speed of this track, which again, I'm sort of leaning into it just being the fact that it's called Fury. It's probably going to have furious lyrics, so having furious music lines up with that very well. The guitar work is absolutely wild. I mean, we got these really fast 16th notes. I don't even know what tempo we were at. If I had to guess, maybe 120 maybe? 125? And we got 16th notes on that. That is not necessarily a fast tempo, but it's not a slow one either. And we're just blazing through it with these 16th notes. The guitarists are all over the neck on it. It's not like they're just holding out one note black metal style and doing the 16th notes on that and then slowly changing. Each of the 16th notes is a different pitch, it feels like, in most of the riffs. It is an endurance test on the right hand. It is a precision and accuracy test for both hands. It is probably exhausting to play, and the guitarists just make it sound so simple. The drummer is right on that same area. Just these very tight 16th notes on the bass kick, these like tight pockets of groupings of a few hits. Other times, just pedal to the metal, just constant 16th notes from somewhere. Cymbals are flying all over the place. I'm looking forward to really listening to the drums on one of these next couple of tracks and seeing if I can't pinpoint some more specific information, but I mean, just a flurry of things. It almost sounds like the cymbals never stop moving. As soon as one starts to, he hits that one. Another one starts to slow down. He makes sure that one gets going. It's a little game just to make sure all the cymbals continue to, rock back and forth after just being hit. But then there's just so much tom and snare and the bass kick work going on. It's just a flurry of sounds constantly. I didn't pick up anything from the bass, and I know in the past I've praised Fleshgod's bass work. I don't know if it was simply being overwhelmed. I don't really remember hearing much of it in the mix, but I never took a chance to directly look for it either. It's a short song with a lot of things going on, so I got to pay attention to the bass next. We also have the choir and strings. I don't know if those are keyboard or not. One of these lyrical breaks when I pause the recording to go check that out. I suppose I'll look at a personnel list and see what's going on there. I see that on Spotify's artist picture, there's 5 people here. And that doesn't seem like enough for a choir and a full string section and a metal band. Oh no, that was Demu. I was going to say, I know we've seen a video of them playing with an orchestra, but I'm pretty sure that was Demu Borgir, not Fleshgod. The one thing, though, that stands out to me that just don't hold as strongly as everything else are the vocals. And it's not that I necessarily want to put them down or anything. I certainly can't make these vocal sounds. There's skill to it, of course, but there's less of the technical flourish to it in a way that's, the jaw-dropping virtuosic. Somebody corrected me on this like a couple months ago because I fumbled over this word and they were like, actually, you're really close, but it's this one. I can't remember if I used to add a T to it or if I needed to add the T to it. It's either virtuosic or virtuostic. I don't remember. Regardless, everybody else is just ridiculously talented in a way that's immediately noticeable. It's one of those things you hear and your jaw hits the floor and you're like, how do they do this? How do they perform a whole show of this? It's not even just about a 4-minute song. How do you put a 60-minute set on and keep up this precision and endurance? The vocals don't have that immediate showboating, I guess you could call it. That's not a great word for it, but just an immediate display of skill, right? But on top of that, there just isn't a lot of dexterity to the vocals either. I think there were 2 different harsh vocal types, although one was used pretty much the most of the song, and it creates a monotonous element to it. Now, I do sort of have a positive and negative approach for this. One is the song absolutely needs some sort of glue, some sort of cohesion. Something a bit on the simpler side to act as a foundation for everything else. I think the vocals sort of do that. Not everything can be technical all the time because then the song sort of falls apart. You need a strong foundation for everything. And I think having this home base of a static element that doesn't really change too much and isn't doing any of the wild ideas absolutely works for that. On the other hand, from a casual perspective, I don't really like these harshes. And I've mentioned this in other Fleshgod songs before. It's just the typical death metal growl. I don't really hear any characteristic to it that feels particularly Fleshgod. It just, to me, sounds like the generic death growl. And I don't know, it doesn't really work for me. And so I would like it to change up, if nothing else, than to add some contrast to it. But I also think from a purely technical or artistic perspective, it is absolutely the right way to go. I would like to hear some other vocals though, be they clean or actually I do know that they occasionally have female vocals in their songs. Because there was one when we checked out something on live stream not too long ago. And I'm curious if we're going to hear any of that on this album. But that would be nice to break things up. But I don't even need cleans. I would just like a different type of harsh just to change things up a little bit. But that's definitely a personal problem. As I've heard it referred to lately, that's a skill issue. So I'm not going to hold it too much against them, but it is something that I think I'm going to end up having to take a break, probably in the middle of the album, because I do think it's going to wear on me a bit much, and just kind of give me a moment to clear my mind, maybe finish reading this book I'm reading, and just kind of get away from the music for a second, so that when I come back, the vocals are a bit fresher. I think that's about all I wanted to talk about with this initial track. There's some other things that were more generic about their sound that I think we'll just touch on as the rest of the album goes on. I'm trying to do this thing where I pace out some of my ideas so we don't have an hour of like raw discussion at the beginning and then everything in the back is really short analysis sections and mostly just listening to the music. So I'm trying this thing where generic ideas about their song, stuff that doesn't necessarily relate to the song itself, and it's probably something that's going to relate to many other songs. It's kind of dole them out slowly as I see fit for them. So, let me hit some lyrics. Should I check out Yeah, I'll check out Personnel already. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then we'll move into, I guess, the next 2 songs. Because then that would give us our interlude into track 5, which is probably a nice way to do that. Alright, so this is interesting. At least as of the time of this album, there were only 3 official members. 2 of them named Francesco, which I think is pretty funny. 66% of their band has the same name. We have the lead vocalist and the guitarist and the drummer and the songwriter and the lyricist. Then we have a bassist and clean vocalist, and then a piano orchestration songwriter. So, That covers a lot of ground. I'm also curious though, the vocals take a lot of talent to do those harshes. The guitar work is sick. I just praised the ridiculousness of it. But also the drum work is very sick, and I praised its ridiculousness. And we have one person who's capable of all three. Talk about someone who is multi-talented and passionate enough to push the boundaries on all three of their instruments. That's just ridiculous. However, they do have a ton of session and guest and live musicians. So, we do have a drummer as a session musician and live musician. And it makes me wonder if the permanent member who happens to do drums can play at the level, or if they play close to the level, they know what they want, and then they tell their session musician, how to bring it to that 100%. They can get like 70% of the way there, but they want that 100% recording, right? Because like I said, that's a lot of talent to put into one dude. I'm not saying it's impossible, but that's a lot of dedication. And maybe this person put it in, and if so, man, they deserve all the skill they got. Aside from that, we also have a lead guitarist as a session musician, and everything else appears to be outside of the metal components. We have accordion, 2 violinists, a viola, a cellist, a double bass, mandolin, Uilleann pipes. I should have looked this up, because when I looked at it, I was like, what is that? And then I didn't answer that question. I came into the video still not knowing what it was. Oh, they're a type of bagpipes. They are. Sometimes called Irish bagpipes, are the characteristic national bagpipe of Ireland. Interesting. The partial translation of Uilleann pipes is a partial translation of the Irish language word, the translation of pipes of the elbow, which I'm not going to try to pronounce this because it's going to come off completely wrong. But yeah, so that's okay. So bagpipes. There's bagpipes on the album. Orchestral percussion, which makes me think we might have orchestral bass drum. Maybe an orchestral snare. Probably not. What I'm thinking of probably happening is timpani. And maybe glockenspiel or like a marimba. I didn't hear any of that on our opening track, but knowing that there's some auxiliary percussion typically used in orchestral settings is pretty cool. And then we have a soprano vocalist. And did I mention the second guitarist, the lead guitarist? All right. So yeah, there's quite a bit more people than are in the band, and I appreciate that they didn't go for keyboard work on this. As for the lyrics, this song is about a hatred towards ignorance. And not even necessarily just ignorance, because I think a lot of people are ignorant about a lot of things. There's so much information out there, there has to be blind spots for everyone. But it's the idea of spreading the ignorance as a sort of de facto element of just saying this is how things should be. In another sense, I think it's not necessarily about ignorance, but about being an idiot. Of doubling down on your ignorance rather than taking it as an opportunity to expand your mind. Says, verse 1, I see the void in the eyes of men, a throng that sinks into the sludge of mediocrity. The deafening buzzing of a swarm passively sucked into the vortex of ignorance. I have no respect for the progeny of Philistines. I can't stand the deficit infecting the world. Basically, he says that I see the world getting dumber every day, and I'm sick and tired of it. At one part, he says, crowding the temple of delirium, the consecrated mausoleum of genius, idiotic herd soiling masters' legacy. Martyred themselves for the sake of rationalism. So basically, these people are dumb, they're happy being dumb, and they group together in big herds in order to amplify their stupidity. And they do this as an affront to and in opposition of mausoleums of genius. So the ideas that people of the past have toiled endlessly to find out answers to how our world works, they've passed away giving us this awesome information, and people are just casting it aside and saying, you know what, my stupidity's better than that answer. The bridge is just a repetition of be gone. Verse 3 takes its anger to another level and just says, shut up, you deplorable mass antagonists of progress. Shut up, the scientific method foes, hushed by deduction. It's just... wow. Shut up, you superstitious rats, erased forever. The chorus is about burning all of this, using the flame of wisdom to burn out stupidity. It says, let our goddesses reason rule rule again this miserable world. Yeah, it's just about being real mad at people's stupidity and reluctance to learn about stuff. And yeah, you know, when in 2019 did this come out? Do I have a year for that? Spotify, you got me on this? May of 2019. Little did they know, this song would have been my anthem through the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020. And it still is a bit of an anthem today, I think, as I feel more and more anti-science people continue to just kind of flow out from the woodworks. They just come out of nowhere. Pushing against intelligence and knowledge. Yeah. There's a very strange timeliness to this, having come out just a few months before COVID started to really spread out across the globe. But I do think it was after the Flat Earth movement really started to pick up speed. And there is a line in here about idiots stubbornly sinking their rotten roots in their dry flat earth. But yeah. I understand the anger in this one. I really do. Alright. Pushing forward, we have Carnivorous Lamb. I'm going to rewind it that 1 second. Make sure we get the full effect of this. As y'all remember, at the end of Fury, we had a one beat stop, and the beat after that, we kicked off this next track. Like I said, there is a bit of a connectedness between these two songs, but it's not like they directly flowed into one another. We do have a very, very short stop between them, so I'm not going to worry too much about rewinding back to the first track to hear that transition. Let's dive into it. That's the bagpipe, isn't it? Oh, but it's accompanied by the string section. Because I was like, it's a little off. The timbre's not what I would expect. But I do think we're getting some texture layering there, creating a new timbre altogether. Oh, the guitar's in on this now. Very epic. fully clean. It's got some compression to it. Oh, it's almost like a heavy metal belt. Yeah, let's go. Bringing in that heavy groove. Halftime on the drums. Snare just on the 1 and 3, yeah. Very interesting layering idea there. Very cool use of the string, the violins there specifically. This song is a bit more metal, less symphonic though. It's really this chorus that brings the epicness to it. That falsetto kills me. Interesting. I'm pretty sure this is still 4/4, but they're playing around with accent points, making it sound like the phrase starts at different points. Oh no, it's the snare accents. Yeah, we're just gonna move. No, we're not. No, we're not. No, we're not. No, we're not. I need to talk about that one. I know this goes against my plan, but you know I can't stick with a plan, right? A couple of things specific to that track, right? One, I think we heard some female vocals, 2 words in verse 1. They kind of came out of nowhere. It sounded like they were doing call and response with the growls, and then we just never got another response again. I thought that was interesting. When the chorus came in and I heard the clean, I thought that's what we were getting. A little bit of foreshadowing in the verse to introduce that we were going to be getting these vocals throughout the chorus, and that's not what happened. We got the backing vocalist, the bassist probably, I think. Although I think on the session musician list, I got rid of that. I think that the session guitarist also does backing vocals. Regardless, we got another male vocalist doing some heavy metal belts, which... yeah, that's an interesting idea. It felt a little bit to me like it was outside of their range. I think they hit the pitches fine. It really didn't get sharp, which is I think what normally people would do if it was a bit outside their range. But it also didn't really feel like it was a comfortable range for the vocalist to be in, and it felt like their vocals were strained a bit. I don't think damage was done, but I don't think it sounded great either. I don't know what the best decision would have been to do there. I don't necessarily want to say, oh, just put the other vocalist in. but I don't think a key change would have been great either, and those were certainly the pitches you want for that melody. So I don't know, it almost feels like a situation where compositionally that's what you wanted to do, and they just lacked the personnel to pull it off 100%, so we got something that was like 80%. But yeah, especially the fourth line that the clean vocalist does way up there when we hit that falsetto, it just feels really weak to me, and it lacks the power that I think a power metal vocalist would have brought to the table there to make that feel as big and epic as the song kind of implies it should. So yeah, I'm a little hit and miss on that. I think it's a good idea, just not quite executed at 100%. Not bad, but not perfect either. I am looking forward to more cleans though. Like I said, that one was a bit clean distorted. And I think that's fine, gives it that heavy metal belting kind of feel. But, oh, it was a nice contrast, regardless. And I like how it was, sort of divvies up the workload a bit and introduces new sounds on our lead melody lines. The orchestral part, the classical writing, is just not here as much. We don't have any of those cool piano lines that we saw in the first track. Oh, I take that back. We had one cool piano line in here. But yeah, we're missing some of the piano flourish that we had on the first track. The choir and strings aren't utilized in as much of a lead manner as they were in the first track. They are sort of they're, they're put on atmospheric duty, honestly. It comes to the chorus, they come in and give us these really big chords. It's what I talked about last analysis, how I really liked that they were engaging all of their instruments on the same level instead of emphasizing one or the other, and that's what we get on this track. This is a heavily metal track that occasionally has symphonic instruments to give us chords, to give us that texture, that extra feeling to it without any of the compositional sides of it. It's fine, not usually my cup of tea. I prefer the more dynamic writing that we heard in the first track, but this works. It's just not my preference. We did have something really interesting happen though, and it's the guitar solo. It really took me off guard because we have this really cool guitar solo with a new guitar, well, tone. I was going to say timbre, but metal people would call it a guitar tone. I don't think we heard it in the first track at all, primarily because there was no solo guitar moment. So we got a lot of guitar riffage, and they're going to use their riff style sound rather than the one that's a bit more cutting and piercing and deserving of being a lead tone rather than a more foundational tone. But it was on top of just straight 16th notes on the bass kick. That's a really interesting foundation for a solo. The snare came in eventually on 1 and 3 or 2 and 4. It was every other beat. And then we got a cymbal hit, I think on every 4 beats. So a very simple rhythmic pattern, very rigid, focusing on the pure driving energy of the bass kick. Then we had the guitar riff come back from, I think it was the verse, on the left, and then on the right, and then there was a new guitar riff on top of that, then the solo guitar left, and we got into the bridge or whatever was next. The vocals came back in, the growls. That was a very cool way to build this section up while still being a solo section, and I think it's a nice subversion, maybe even, of the guitar solo, which tends to be either just chords with the soloist on top, or what I see a lot in some later heavy metal is the verse riff and then the soloist on top. And so I thought it was very cool to provide some compositional structure to it. It isn't just the foundation. We're going to build the foundation up as the soloist takes the spotlight. I thought that was pretty cool. Unusual, but I think it was effective. There was one more thing I wish I'd wrote it down, because I think there was one more thing I wanted to bring up. I'm going to hit some lyrics. Maybe I'll think about it then, see what I can come up with. Oh yeah, the last thing I wanted to bring up was actually not really a big deal, but I just I did listen for the bass this time around in a couple of sections, and I couldn't really hear it. From what I could hear, it's just in line with what one of the guitars are doing. I didn't really hear any unique bass lines, but I vaguely remember watching one of the music videos, and the bassist was like, he's tearing it up. Maybe I'm thinking of a different band, which, it's possible. We listen to a lot of music, and I do get bands confused often. In fact, I got Godflesh mixed up with Demu just, a half hour ago. So it's possible. Death metal is also one of those genres that traditionally has either pushed the bass out of the mix or has snuck the bass underneath the guitarist, replicating what they're doing with root tones only. So, given the heavy bass resonance in the guitars already, these aren't treble focused, they're very bass focused, very modern metal sound coming from the guitars. And the fact that there's usually a lot of things going on anyways, putting the bass on the same part that the guitars are playing and kind of getting lost a little bit in the mix due to the guitars already covering up a lot of the bass area seems accurate for this style of music. I don't think it's unusual at all. I'm still going to listen out for the bass, see if I can't hear anything particular throughout the album, but if not, I'm just going to assume that the bass is replicating a lot of the guitar work, and if I don't bring it up again, just kind of assume that that's what most of the songs are doing as far as the bass is concerned. Now, before we get into the lyrics, I do see that on Genius there's 24 tracks, probably in some sort, oh yeah, the deluxe version. There is a 12th bonus track called Reese, R-E-I-S-E. There is a 13th bonus track called The Forsaking Nocturnal version. Now, the Forsaking is not off of this album, but given that it has a version to it, I'm going to assume that it's a remix or a re-recording or a new version of something from an older album of theirs. And then there is all 11 tracks of the original release, not the Race bonus track, but instrumental versions of the original 11 tracks. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I don't understand instrumental versions of metal albums. Sometimes I can kind of get behind it. This album in particular, you'd probably think, Bryan, you don't even like the vocals here. It would probably be better without them, right? I don't think so. First of all, as I've said many times in the past, the vocalist is an instrument. They are bringing something to the song. This isn't just an instrumental version. This is a version with something removed. And as I mentioned after the first track, the vocals are a type of cohesion for that song. Everything was so chaotic, you needed something a bit more static to allow everything else to be built on top of. If you remove that, I really think the song's going to fall apart a little bit. It's going to be missing some sort of core. I think it'll probably work fine, but I don't feel like it'll be the superior version. Even though I don't even like the way the vocals really sound, I still don't think a version without them would be better. But we get to a track like Carnivorous Lamb, and that means you're removing the entire melody line from the chorus, which means you're left with just foundation. That might work the first time around, but the third chorus is going to feel really boring. So we're 2 songs in, and I mean, obviously there's an audience for instrumental metal albums. Not just the fact that they've been written as instrumentals, but that they were written with a vocal in mind, and then that vocal track was just muted for this version. Very different from a band who doesn't have a vocalist and only makes instrumental music. That's a totally different topic altogether. But there is an audience for this. There's too many bands who mute their vocal stems and release the instrumental versions for it not to have an audience. I don't understand it though. To me, 100% of the songs we've listened to so far are going to be worse off without the vocal lines. So, I don't know. Maybe I'm just not the audience for it, and that's fine. But it's one of those cases where even in other situations where I'd be like, this isn't for me, but I understand why people like it. I don't get this one. Especially since there are clean vocals on this album. Um, I don't know. If anybody wants to sort of give me their input on it, the only thing I can think is that you don't like the vocals to such an extent that you can't listen to the album if they're present. Where at least with the instrumental version, you can listen to the music at least. And yeah, I mean, that might be a topic for another day. But imagine applying that to anything else. Listening to a band and say, well, I like most of it, but I don't like, you know, this one piece. I want a version of your vision without one of your members participating in it. And that just sounds like a slap in the face to the artists. Um, I don't know. Like I said, if you have opinions about this, thoughts about this, please let me know. I'm open for conversation about it because it's one of those things that I have such a trouble getting around to the element of appreciation on. And I try to always come at everything from at least a neutral perspective so that despite having my own subjective bias about it, I can at least have an appreciation of other people's opinions. And I'm having a hard time coming around on this one. So, yeah, that's that. To the lyrics. And here we have another track that I feel like could be a modern day anthem for some people. They're two for two here lyrically. This is a song about calling out professional victims. People who are always in control of everything but want everyone's sympathy because they're being attacked. They create situations that put them in a negative space and then try to abuse the fact that they were put in, brought down a little bit. The verse starts out and says, I've seen things go against their nature. White snow turning coal, rivers going up streams, lumps of lead soaring. This is because I've also seen lambs grow fangs of the wolves, howling before the kill. So we come to the chorus. It says, until the last heart bleeds, you come and drain us like a leech. Prophet of Judas' kiss, refuse to practice what you preach. Spawn of an impious breed, can't hide yourself forever as you're the sheep that mauls the savage wolf. So you act innocent. You act like you are completely devoid of responsibility for your actions, and you're only being pushed this way because of what other people have done to you. You're so perfect like a lamb, but you're also innocent like a lamb. I think lamb is just such a perfect thing for this because it isn't just about wolves and sheeps. It's about lambs, baby sheep. It's not just the purity of the lamb, of the sheep. It's about the innocence of the baby, right? It's just a perfect metaphor for this. The post-chorus says, I've heard you cry out from hunger and thirst despite being the banquet host. I've seen you pretend to shiver with winter's cold and then idle in the warmth. Yeah, you are not as repressed, as put down, as beaten down as you say you are. When the camera's off, you are nothing of the things that you say. But you will, when you have an audience, tell everybody how abused you are, how terrible life is for you. You're a hypocrite. Later on, says, I've seen you stabbing people in the back with a child's innocence. Forever the victim, forever the ogre, carnivorous lamb. And that's what it comes down to. People who just need that sympathy all the time. They don't know how to exist without it. So they will concoct situations, even concoct lies entirely in order to get that sympathy. The professional victim. Yep, we're two for two on lyrics I'm really enjoying. All right. pushing forward. We're going to do Sugar, which I think is their biggest track as far as plays. Oh yeah, by a long shot. Track 5 has 1.5 million. This has 2.5 million. And then most of their other tracks are less than 1 million plays. They have 130,000 monthly listeners though, which I think is pretty high for a death metal band of their caliber. As far as the community goes, I feel like they're rather well known. But in the realm of metal, I feel like they are not as well known. To me, they're a band that gets thrown around a lot in conversation in my circles. But you don't really hear about them too much outside of the Discord or community requests or stuff like that. But yeah, 6-digit monthly listeners is pretty good. And having 1 million plays on a few songs and 2 million plays on another, yeah, that's good. I'm glad they're getting that reach. We're going to listen to this track, and then we have the 1-minute interlude. I'm going to see how this song ends. If it flows into it, we'll do it. If it doesn't flow into it, we'll stop, and we'll use that to kick us off into track 5, which is Monnalisa. Alright, so, Sugar. Coming in real heavy. Oh, the polyrhythm. Yeah. So the snare is giving us a triplet feel. Oh, it's been pushed over to the China now. Very cool idea on the organ. See here, the metal's taking a bit of a back seat to the orchestral elements. Kind of slowing it down, but also opening up the sounds here, removing many of those layers. So those shifts to the offbeats. Yeah, it's still 4/4. They just shift offbeats. Blast beats, just another thing to put onto the drummer's skill set. I like that. Really nice way to build the energy up into this without doing a crescendo. think that's the first clean stop that we've had. The other two stops we had between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3, they were a bit less clear. They sort of just bulldozed into the next track, even though they weren't continuous. Yeah, so something I haven't really talked about too much is rhythm. All the songs so far have been in 4/4, and there's a rigidity to a lot of it. We don't really have syncopated ideas in the drum work. We do occasionally have some syncopated ideas in the guitar work, and sometimes in the bass kick as far as groupings of 16th notes. But that's more of creating a rhythmic pulse, but not just going dump, dump, dump. So you got to do like some faster playing there. So instead of just quarter notes, you put 16th notes in there. But in that track particularly, we had a focus on offbeats in places where it actually made me think that we were doing like 4 bars and then 3 bars in order to offset where our accent point was. Because if we're accenting on 1 and 3, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. So when we remove that 4th beat from that second bar, we turn it into a 3. We shift. If we keep our accent point on every other beat, we're shifting from 1 and 3 to 2 and 4. And I thought that's what was happening there, but when I counted it out, it's all 4/4. So there's actually just a shifting of where the accent is. But that means that it actually changes. There should be a point where the accent doesn't feel equidistant from all the other ones. But it happens so fast that I think it just kind of blurs into it, and it makes it a bit confusing. And I find that really intriguing. I couldn't figure out where that point happened, but it happens, and I think that's pretty cool. That's really the only style of syncopation that we have in here. We don't have anything that plays around with jumping back and forth between downbeats and offbeats. We don't have shifting rhythms where we will play around with quarter notes, eighth notes, and 16th notes in a way to create something that's a bit more bouncier. Everything is rigid. It's this death metal rigid power. But that doesn't mean that we don't have sections where we can explore something a little bit different. And so while I don't think we've explored any song so far or any section that has incorporated a pure triplet vibe or a 3/4 section. We have had triplets played on top of the 16th notes in order to create a polyrhythmic feeling. Now the 16th notes, at least to me, especially at the speed that they've been playing, sort of blur together into just a really long note. The space between the notes is so small that my ear sometimes just doesn't even want to perceive it and just hears a long held out note. And so occasionally this triplet feel sort of gives me a bit of a rhythmic feel, a rhythmic flow to these sections, rather than it really feeling like a strong element of polyrhythm, in the fact that it doesn't really feel like two rhythms are clashing. And I find that to be really interesting as well, because I know there's a 4/4 going on, but I don't always feel it in a visceral way like the drumming would make me believe. And so when those triplet parts come in, just kind of feels like we've shifted to a triplet feel rather than it being polyrhythmic. But I don't think any of those moments ever actually shift time signature. So we do have a 3/4 idea. And just on the concept of drumming in general, I do want to point out blast beats. Yep, just another skill to put onto the drummer's list of the crazy stuff he's doing over there. Just bonkers. And again, at this speed, right? And I do want to emphasize here, just in case, because I can already see the comments, this isn't even really that fast. No, it's not the fastest thing we've listened to on the channel, but I mean, that doesn't feel like any reason to diminish the skill and the speed on display here, right? Splitting hairs. Harmony. Looking at all these songs together, there's a very strong death metal feeling here. I don't think that's hidden in any way. Very pentatonic style. Pentatonic means that we pick 5 notes from the scale. There's 5 specific notes, but it doesn't really make that much. It it doesn't add that much to the understanding unless you're wanting to dig into the theory of it. But I figure most of us here are going to be light on, on chord theory, so I'm going to keep the conversation light. Chords are typically comprised, well, I say typically, your chord can be comprised of a lot of notes or a little bit of notes, especially as you get into other regions and cultures and folk styles and stuff like that. But 7 notes is generally a good place to start for Western chords. Pentatonic, 5. So we're missing 2. And what that means is that it's kind of vague. The more notes you have, the more clear the interactions between them and the more clear the emotion is. Pentatonic removes that information. It makes it less clear, makes it more vague. It's what gives it that rule of cool sound and what allows metal, especially writing in this style, to fit with a lot of sounds. It is why, when you listen to the piano work or the moving melodic violin lines, you might think, oh, that sounds kind of classical. And then you listen to the guitars and you're like, well, that just sounds like metal. Well, that's why. Basically, the piano and the strings can take the 5 notes that the guitar is using from the pentatonic and then just put in those 2 other notes. They're going to sound harmonious because now you have the full chord that you removed some of the notes from in order to create, chord, you have the full scale that you remove some of the notes from for the guitar to play. You're just adding them back in. And so they sound good alongside what the guitars are playing, but it also gives it more of that classical flair. And that's what's happening in a lot of the sections here. And it's what gives them the freedom to write classical and metal simultaneously and allow different instruments to carry these different feelings without ever feeling like there's a clash as far as theming or harmony are going. It's also what allows the song to, when we don't have piano or string elements like many sections from track 2, to feel like straightforward death metal. And how it also doesn't feel like it's in odds or in opposition to something like Fury or Sugar, which does have more of the symphonic elements to it. Because it's not that we have 2 specific sides. It's not classical versus metal. It's 5 notes versus 7 notes. Sometimes we just expand the range out a little bit to get more characteristic out of it, and sometimes we remove it down and remove some of that characteristic. But there's no clash. And that's what really allows them to do a lot of this stuff and have the dexterity to jump between these 2 sounds and even intermingle them. Many sections here, as I mentioned, the guitars are just playing pentatonic stuff. They sound like they're doing death metal. But then you listen to the piano and you're like, well, that doesn't sound very metal. That's why. It's a really genius thing to do. And I wonder how many other bands do something similar, because I don't think I've ever brought this up before. Even for prolific bands like Nightwish or Epica, I think even the guitarists tend to play a bit more on the classical side of things within those, unless they're doing power chords, in which case they just kind of turn into that functional, foundational stuff for the string and orchestral stuff to take prominence. And that's an entirely different type of composition in general, as again, we're not combining the 2 sides. One's relegated to a secondary function and one's the lead. Here, though, both are going off at the same time, and they're both in their own little realms. And that's why, because they're not their own realms. It's more like a Venn diagram, where you have a really big middle section, and then really tiny pieces off to the side that are isolated from each other. And so there's a lot of ground to cover in the middle, where things are going to sound connected. All right. I think that's all I wanted to bring up for Sugar. There were a couple of things that I enjoyed, some nice touches, a little piano line here. The violin was used in a cool way. I don't know how it's produced, but it almost sounds like sliding the bow along the string, but not perpendicular, parallel, just kind of running it down, and it creates this sort of screechy demonic sound. We heard it in Carnivorous Lamb as well, and I brought it up during the reaction, but I don't think I talked about it in the analysis. Little things like that, utilizing the instruments in a way that they can be used and have been used in the past, but not a very traditional sound, and probably not something you're going to get from a sound library, right? So it's one of those ways that Fleshgod uses the instruments in ways that they would be used in a classical sense. And I enjoy that, right? It's one of those things that differentiate it from a metal band who's putting some strings in their music to a classical composer who happens to also want to write metal and understands the instruments they're adding to the metal scene. And again, I don't want to say one's better than the other. I have my preference, but I do enjoy when we actually get to hear these instruments utilized as they would be. What was the other thing that I wanted to bring up? Oh, yeah. The push, 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 push. I thought that was a really cool way to increase the intensity of that section without using a crescendo, which is just making the volume rise gradually. Because we went from this section, we layered a couple things on, and we had this very tense whispering coming in from either side, and then we pushed back into the biggest chorus we had as far as intensity goes. And we didn't do it by gradually bringing the volume up. We didn't do it with a drop into it. We just increased the tension through composition. And so when we jump up to that new volume, because there's so many things present here, it just makes sense. And I really like that. They did a unique way to get there. Let's hit some lyrics on this one. So, it seems to be an anti-drug song, particularly heroin, it seems, as we're melting down a powder on a spoon, putting it into a needle and injecting it. That's where the idea of push comes in, pushing of the syringe of the needle. It says the sugar will kill your pain, satisfy your frustrations, quench your sick desire, sweeten your pain with fairy dust as desperation melts down this toxic powder on that spoon. You set your life on fire. The pre-chorus says it's self-destruction, it's suicide. These wicked voices bewitch you, but you're too young to die. Speak to your torment, honey, and listen to your soul, as we're the temple of strength and we must soldier on. The idea that everybody says how bad it is, but honestly, it feels great. And, I'm young. I don't know if anyone else remembers this, but as a teenager, I was invincible. I did a lot of really dumb stuff I would not do today. I feel the fragility of my body at the age of 30 something that I'm at right now that I did not feel when I was 16. I dove into cars. I jumped off of moving cars. We did a lot of dumb stuff when I was a kid. With cars, honestly, too often than not. But yeah, so this idea, I'm too young to die, and this stuff makes me happy, so why wouldn't I do it now? The chorus says the hunter has become to prey. The master turns into a slave. I want to see you push. Your mother's cries, your father's prayers, they mean nothing. So yeah, it seems a lot of this it's through two perspectives. One seems to be a perspective of an onlooker, looking down their nose a little bit at this. Verse 1 seems to be from a third party viewing this ritual of taking the drug with a bit of disdain for it. But then the pre-chorus seems to be from, the chorus, I should say, looks like it's from the perspective of the drug itself as a master over this puppet. Yes, that's intentional. The post-chorus just says, pump this venom through your veins into your bleeding heart. Verse 2 talks about how great it is, orgasmic rapture. Down in a hole, the needle bleeds, the pleasure grows. Internal fracture, denial of your soul, your blood freezes your body. Then the outro just says, how can you do this to yourself in your prime? Life's worth living no matter what is the sacrifice. So, yeah, it just talks about how these people might feel pleasure from drugs, but that in the end, they always are bad. They're pretty much always going to destroy your body on some level, whether you feel it today or tomorrow or in 50 years. But that the users are so wrapped up and controlled by it that nothing else matters. That one was less intentional. If you caught that, had less to do with the song and more to do with my last bit of wordplay. I am noticing something here though, right? So this is about a sort of a literal poison that people put into their body, but track 1 was about the poison of stupidity. Track 2 was about the poison of people who only seek out... What was that about? When they were like pretending to be liars, basically, hypocrites, right? Professional victims, that's what it was. About how that's poisoning society in a way. The album is called Veleno, which, as I mentioned, translates to English as venom or poison. We are 3 songs in, detailing things that are bad for humans in general or humans in particular. And something tells me this pattern's going to continue. Although, based off of the rest of the titles, well, if I look at Fury and Carnivorous Slam, I don't think I would have guessed those either. It's the lyrics that lean into the themes, not the titles. But I was going to say, based off of the next few titles, I don't see this theme continuing on. However, Embrace the Oblivion, track 10, could be about nihilism. So, we have our interlude coming up, the Praying Mantis's Strategy. And then we'll listen to the 5.5-minute track, Hello, new version of Proton Drive is available. Thank you for interrupting the recording, Proton Drive. That's never happened before. I know that Windows has like, what do they call them, sleeping hours or working hours or something where no notifications will pop up, but I've never had to use it before. 5 years in, I think that's the first time. All right. Yeah, then we'll go into the 5.5-minute Monnalisa. Let's dive into it. Has this been the choir the whole time? Because I think there's only 2, maybe 3 layers to the choir. Maybe that is our female vocalist the whole time, just multi-tracking herself. Because I have noticed there's no choir in the personnel list. So we always have the concept of time ticking. This one does have some syncopation to it. A lot of the emphases are on the half beat before the downbeat. Got some bass here. Yeah, so this is quieter than everything else and a bit moodier as well. That's what I said when I was muted. Yeah, very cool listening to the guitar lean a little bit more on the classical side of writing. Oh. Huh. Yeah, bringing in some classical composition as far as ornamentation goes on the strings, not just classical melody. Powerful way to end this track. Is this going into the next track? Kind of, I think. The reverb didn't give way at the end, so I think it does. So that moment, I was like, oh, wait a second. Transitions. I haven't talked about them at all, which is interesting. I'm trying to think back on how some of the sections move between each other. And there's a general fluidity through everything, but there isn't this idea of, foreshadowing or callback or anything like that that would make it stand out. And so I think a lot of the transitions are just sort of neutral. They're not harsh in a way that immediately calls attention to them, but they're not completely interlinked in a way that calls attention to that either. And so I've just kind of been glossing over it, which is admittedly very cool. It was just right there when we had that harsh jump from the quieter section into the 16th note bass kick with the, this large symphonic idea and the growling and the guitar work. And I was like, wait, that was pretty harsh. Wait, that's the first time in half an album that I've even thought about the transitions. I don't know if I'm going to focus too much on it going forward, but I am kind of curious just for my own how the transitions are done, because I'm curious how it kind of went under my radar. It's one of those things that I pay a lot of attention to generally. So I found that to be interesting. This song exists on two worlds, though. I mentioned at the beginning that it was very moody, very atmospheric, rather chill. Even the chorus, which brings up the intensity a bit, feels more like the symphonic metal you would find from an Epica or an After Forever, more so than the death metal symphonic that we get on pretty much everywhere else in the album. And I think a lot of it comes down to the lack of growls, but also the focus on atmosphere and, most importantly, rhythmic intensity has been dramatically decreased. Almost every song is focused on 16th notes somewhere, and now we're holding notes out, half notes, whole notes. They're just allowing these notes to ring, to reverberate, rather than to be cut off almost immediately after you play them. That changes the feeling of a song dramatically. And so while the timbre of the instruments hasn't really changed, although like I said, the vocals are primarily clean in this section, so that is a timbre shift. But mostly the timbres haven't changed. The guitars, the bass, the drums, they all sound the same. The harmonic work hasn't changed, and technically the composition hasn't really changed either too much. Just the rhythmic shift of holding these notes out changes so much of the way it feels. And I really enjoyed that. It's a nice break. Again, this is right in the middle of the album, give or take. Our longest track is in the back half, and we are technically not halfway through the track list. That'll happen halfway into the next track. We will be in the middle of that track, track-wise. But I do think the back half is long. Oh yeah, both of our longest tracks on the back half. So length-wise, we're not even halfway through the album. But I feel like after three songs of like pure intensity, we have Praying Mantis Strategy to kind of chill things out on a sonic level because it's intense harmonically with the clicking of the clock and the ticking of the the clock ticks stuff and the very intense choir, but that's sort of it. We don't have a lot of other stuff going on, and so it's relatively calm compared to the rest of the album. And then the opening of Monnalisa goes for something moodier, more dramatic than aggressive. And so we do have a nice little 3 minute or so chill out section in the album. And then, the end of Monnalisa kicks us back up. And I'm going to assume we're going to have a few tracks here that are heavy again, but we'll probably have another dip in intensity. Probably around track 7, maybe 8 or 9, before going to a peak on track 10, which is the longest song, and that's going to be our ending, give or take, though we do have our 2-minute outro. That's my idea of how the general flow of this album is going to go from here on out, but I think this is a really great place to put that. There was also something else I pointed out here, which is classical composition in the realm of ornamentation. If you listen to the way that the strings, or even particularly the piano, how their melodies are played, very classical. But when you listen to embellishments, we really don't have that many coming from them. We don't have, stingers. Who uses stingers a lot? Is it Nightwish? They use the strings bump, 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 bump. Just these really sharp, short notes to create those rhythmic ideas. That's a very Nightwish thing, right? We don't really hear too much of that here. A lot of the strings, the piano, the classical components to this are primarily rooted in either atmosphere, they're playing chords, or melody. And it was very cool to hear some of the ornamental ideas coming through that you would traditionally hear the strings do in an orchestra. I guess that was the one piece of the puzzle I didn't realize was missing, but is incorporated here in a way that again shows me the composer or composers. I think there were 2 songwriter credits on Metal Archives for this. That they know what they're doing, not just within the realm of metal, but within the realm of classical. And it isn't just a couple of ideas. They seem to have a very strong grasp on the entire realm of classical, even though they don't incorporate all of it into these songs. They still have a strong grasp of it and could make a traditional classical song, I think, if they wanted to. Is there anything else I wanted to add here? Oh, yeah. Clean vocals in general. I liked Monnalisa. I did question the choir, right? Because we didn't see a choir personnel listing. And when we listened to the choir in the Praying Mantis strategy, I think I only heard 3 voices. Something that could very easily been done with backing tracks. Especially, well, I was going to say especially since the vocalist would only need to do a couple of songs. But if the vocalist is doing the choir like this, it's been present in like all the tracks. That's a lot of recording to do backing track on all of them, but it's probably what happened, isn't it? We did hit a point in the middle of Monnalisa though where we had our isolated female vocalist, no choir. Very operatic. I knew this going in, and for some reason I'm kind of let down about it. Don't get me wrong, the skill, it's all there. This person has chops, and it sounds great. But I don't know, it didn't fit for some reason. And like I said, we've listened to a couple tracks from Fleshgod with operatic vocalists in them. So I knew this was it, but for some reason it just caught me off guard when she sang operatically. I was like, I don't know. I think I would have preferred more of a rock style, forward projected, less vibrato style at that section, and it might just have to do with the music underneath it. I honestly don't know. But I don't know. It might not have had anything to do with the vocals in general. Maybe the section just being a bit less layered made it feel a bit flat for me. Could have been a production thing at the end of the day too. But yeah, it's the only time that we've had isolated female cleans, and it just didn't click for me, which is weird because usually I look forward to those sections in symphonic metal. So I don't know. Yeah, lyrics. Praying Mantis Strategy does not have any lyrics that I can find. Both Genius and Metal Archives listed as an instrumental, but it's it's dominated by a choir. Now maybe they're just singing vowels to create a sound for the notes to exist alongside, given that it's vocals, right? But I could have sworn I heard words in there. So can't comment on that. Monnalisa though. Going along with the idea of venom or poison, this one appears to be looking down on the mind control of love, or probably, I think, lust. It speaks about a person who was born to rule the world, ready to shed his brother's blood, to be a powerful, possibly tyrant, even a warlord, and yet says, I'm still your doormat. Your mesmerizing smile just makes me lose my mind. The chorus is evolved every single time that we revisit it. There's an additional element to it. So I'm only going to read the final chorus. It says, For you I die. Why don't you care? For you I sacrifice. You're my one and only love, Monnalisa. For you I die. For you I burn alive. As we're those ones, the slaves to our own Monnalisa. The idea that we will continue to deprioritize ourselves in order to get the attention of someone we are infatuated with. But someone who doesn't care about us at all, as it says, I die, but why don't you care? So after a couple of verses about talking about how powerless he is in the face of this woman's smile, well, I guess it doesn't have to be a woman, but Monnalisa tends to push towards that direction. Then we get a post-chorus later that says, I gave up my whole life and caged my freedom, aged like a puppet wired to your finger, drowned all my wishes in remorse, tormented my soul, stepped on my dignity in the name of your love. I made myself less than a person, didn't care about myself, basically deprioritized all of what I wanted in life for you. The bridge. This line kills me because it attempts to absolve our character of all this is so good, of all responsibility, trying to be the victim here. It says, oh my Adam, hark the snake, forsake your lord for me, your goddess. Almost as saying, it wasn't my fault, it was the snake, the woman, going back to Adam and Eve and the snake. This one feels a bit odd in the context of Venom. because this is a person who at any time could have taken responsibility for their actions. However, from another perspective, it could be the allure of love. After all, we can look at it as addiction as well, chemical process, except instead of putting the chemical into our body directly, physically, like we did with, what was that track? Sugar. This is one that we don't really have control over. It's the dopamine hits from the visuals of seeing this person or being around this person, the intoxication of it. We don't really have control over that other than to just not be around them. Which, I mean, yeah, but that usually requires someone else to say, hey, snap out of it, bro. You need to stop being around this because this relationship's toxic. It's unrequited love. You need to get away from it. And it doesn't sound like this person has that sort of support network either. So, I don't know. From one angle, I think it works well with the album themes that we've been exploring so far. But from another angle, I also want to say, dude, this was all on you. And I don't really think it's fit so much about something we should be angry at because it's a poison people put in their body or a way that people poison humanity. It's just a moral failing of one person, not being able to recognize a situation and unfortunately not having a social network to help them recognize the negativity of a situation. However, also by the end of it, he says, I give up everything for you and you don't even notice me. So, like, at what point do you stop feeling bad for the guy? Because he figured it out but kept pushing anyways. I don't know. I'm kind of 50-50 on this one. Let's keep this train rolling. All right. We have 6 songs to go. Dive into Worship and Forget, track number 6. An interesting little rhythmic idea here. Nice little riff over here. That is a meaty bass tone. I love the rhythmic interplay between these two lines off on the sides. The piano shining through a little bit. Oh, interesting shift of tone. Going for something a bit larger than life than just the raw aggression we had. Interesting harmony that the piano's bringing in. It's very tense, not dissonant though. Oh, now this is nice. was a small tempo shift, right? But the snare shifted from every other beat to every beat. Made it feel like it was even bigger of a jump than it was. Oh! Yeah. Of course, I talked over the best part of the guitar solo. Yeah, that middle was sick though. I don't think y'all got to hear it, but it was good. Bringing that, that choppy rhythm back. Oh, nice big opening for this. This is the same vocalist from track 2, right? You know, it's interesting when I saw the personnel listing as vocals clean, this wasn't really what I had in mind. It's an interesting timbre for clean vocals. Very much outside the norm, but it gives Fleshgod a unique sound. Big choir in the backgrounds. Would this album fall under tech death? Okay. They jump back and forth between the raw aggression of the metal and then these moments of uplifts. Ooh. Oh. Ah. It's a nice little section right here. They just can't. They gotta amp it back up for every ending. Like 20 seconds to go, whatever. We still have room to put in some double bass kicks and some guitar work. All right. I don't really have a lot of things specific to either of these two songs that I want to bring up, which, I mean, that's how these kind of albums go. Unless you're pulling off something like Pain of Salvation or what was the other one? You'll Know Us from the Trail of Dead. What was another good one though? Oh, Unexpect, where you do a different genre or style or idea on every single track. There's going to be a lot of overlaps. And this album is very much fast, technical-esque death metal that happens to incorporate some symphonic elements on it. Describing the first song and the death metal elements is going to be the same as describing the last song and its death metal elements. But there are some interesting things that we're picking up on here at the back end of the album that we didn't really hear too much of at the beginning, and one of them is pacing, the flow of songs. It started with Monnalisa, and it was more of, I felt, a dip in intensity for the entire album, as we had run at 10 for 3 songs straight, and we finally brought it down with Praying Mantis Strategy, brought it up a little bit for the beginning of Monnalisa, and then of course the back half of Monnalisa brought it right back up to where we always were. But Worship and Forget had a little bit of a quieter interlude in the middle, as did Absinthe right here. In fact, this quieter section was quite a bit larger than any of the other ones I think that we've heard so far, and I think part of that is just due to the longer runtime. Monnalisa is also on the longer side in the 5-minute range. This is in the 6, and it makes me wonder if track 10, just a few seconds shy of 8 minutes, is also going to have one of these dips. Whereas every single song that sits in the 4-minute range that we've heard so far, the average length of a track for them has all been one intensity. But the dip in Absinthe was really well done. We had this, sitting around like an 8, 9, 10 as far as an intensity goes. Everything was pretty much death metal all the time, 16th notes in some instrument, the growling and all that. Then we bring it down a little bit. We get this beautiful bass and drum work. We get this nice clean vocal, not the screeching clean vocal that we've had in the other places, such as Worship and Forget and Carnivorous Lamb had those. We actually had a very smooth, traditional, clean vocal style in here, and I felt it was just really nice to have this intensity, bring it down, and then bring it back up to the end, a sort of inverse bell curve, in a way that just gives the song some shape. And this had me thinking about pacing on a larger scale. What's the pace of the album? How's that look? It's like 10 all the time. We have the dip at 4 in the beginning of 5, comes back up for 6. In the middle of 7, it dips, but then comes back up. 90% of this album so far, we still have 4 tracks ahead of us, has just been running at full speed all the time. And this is actually compounded by something else that I've alluded to, but haven't really paid much attention to. Many of these songs move into the next one, whether it's deliberately that the notes, I don't think any of the ideas transition over, except maybe Praying Mantis Strategy into Monnalisa. I think Praying Mantis Strategy is an intro to Monnalisa, because the musical idea did cross between those tracks, but that's the only point. Now, at the end of Monnalisa, the last guitar note had some reverb that carried over into Worship and Forget. However, that started a completely brand new idea. But there isn't a hard break between those two. And when we listen to some of the other tracks, despite there not being any of this sonic crossover, there's also not really silence either. There have been some albums we've checked out, and I'm like, geez, there's like 7 seconds of 7 seconds of silence at the end of each track. This is basically non-existent. You get that last note, and then you might get a second, tops, maybe only a couple of beats before the next track is beginning. The pacing of the album is consistently high and just never lets you go, honestly. It's not even just that the songs themselves don't have low points, they don't have quiet points, they don't have silent points, but you don't even get silence between tracks either. It just consistently pushes forward in the most manic way. But on top of that, I did say that the average length of a song on this album is probably in the 4-minute range. There are 5, 6 tracks that are in the 4-minute range, and then we have our 2 interludes, which are going to pull that down a little bit, and our 3 songs that are a bit on the higher side that are going to bring it back up somewhere in the 4-minute range. These songs feel a lot longer than 4 minutes though, and a lot of that has to do with the depth and complexity to them. There is a lot of music that they're cramming into a small amount of space, which that also feels like we're going through music rather quickly. It is wild to, because it's kind of inverse, right? When I'm listening to it, I'm like, dang, this song feels pretty long. And then I look at it and I'm like, it feels like 8 minutes have gone by, but it's only 4. Time feels like it's both contrasting out from one perspective, but also getting compressed in from another. How could 8 minutes go by in 4? That feels ridiculously fast. So the speed, the lack of contrast, the lack of silence even between tracks, and the way that the songs feel like they should be longer than they actually are, all make this album, at least to me, feel incredibly manic. It continues to blur by. What I find most interesting about it is that I'm not really exhausted, though. Usually when we listen to tech death, or even just thrash metal in general, or even black metal, which tends to use a lot of blast beats and 16th note stuff just like this does, I get exhausted, I get overwhelmed by all the information, but that's not really happening here, and I don't know how much of that is me just having been exposed to this kind of stuff for so many years, it's finally setting into place, or if it's something that Fleshgod is doing. But I find it wild that I understand the album feels furious, to call back their first track on this. But I don't feel overwhelmed by it. And I don't know how to reconcile that. I just know that there's a lot of stuff going on. I feel like it should take more time. I feel like I want more silence somewhere. I want more dips, but it's okay. And I don't know why. I don't have an answer for that. But I'm very intrigued by it, especially if it is something they're doing. How do you go about incorporating so much sonic information in a way that isn't overwhelming to somebody who doesn't traditionally listen to stuff like this? I mean, we just listened to... maybe it has been a while. I don't know. I'm just perplexed by it. That's all. If it is me, that's cool. It's kind of nice that I'm evolving musically, to not be completely worn down by the sonic assault that something like this could be. But I kind of hope it's something on them, because that's something to learn. How to make music like this and not push away the people who are going to be furthest from your general audience. So yeah, I actually wrote 3 notes down. I didn't realize they were all sort of interconnected. But yeah, the pacing of the album, the short song lengths, and the lack of space in their transitions. Yeah, that's all kind of worked into pacing. Um, this is some lyrics. Worship and Forget is a song that is about the corruption of religion. Not just the idea of religion becoming corrupted, but religion itself corrupting the people. It talks about humans destroying the world from the inside out as if they were worms in a carcass. Killing, starving, violating, protected by the blessing of a God of nothing. It says that they expand their boundaries of the land of chaos in the name of a fraudulent faith, erecting marble altars to consecrate the shame and kneel, not penitent at all, tasting redemption. So utilizing their religion to enact wars, to push through, to dominate people and reign over people who didn't need new leadership. You just came in and said, this is our land because our God said so, and now we rule over you whether you like it or not. I mean, it's basically like anti-religion 101 right here is, Christianity and Muslim and many of the old religions have been, they've been the leading force for wars for thousands of years. We have the entire Crusades we can jot down on paper about this. So it's not like this is some wildly new take on things. They're just spitting their take on it. It says, words can't wash your filthy soul, and your dogma can't hide the evil. There's gore on the streets of Babylon, blessed by an imaginary god. And then it talks about how people have taken up to converting the word of the Lord into their own, with sermons and preachers doing this. Yeah, the chorus, of course, solidifies all this: worship and forget your sins. That's it. Because all you have to do is ask for forgiveness, and you can just forget any of the bad stuff you've done. It never happened. On top of that, some of the bad stuff you've done might even be encouraged. You don't even have to ask for forgiveness of it. Just forget you did it, because it was okay in the eyes of the Lord. So, yeah, sticking with the idea of venom and poison, this is the poison of religion. Alright, so the title of this one is Absinthe, and it is important to know what absinthe is to understand what the lyrics are about. Absinthe is a green colored spirit, which is very high in alcoholic content. And even some of the information about it, such as it's having the name of La Fille Verte, which is French for the green fairy, even shows up here in one of the opening lines. It does have a psychoactive and hallucinogenic element to it. And because of that, presumably, it has been banned in many countries, including the US and much of Europe. Though, interestingly, it hasn't really been demonstrated to be any more dangerous than any other spirit. Regardless, the idea is we have an alcohol on hand, and much like, what was this track called? Oh, Sugar dealt with heroin. We now have the poison of alcohol. The song is a duet between a sailor and the alcohol absinthe. The sailor says, a sea to sail alone, this glass of fever, and nothing else. My one-way journey into the storm, surpassing the pillars of Hercules, and I can't go back anymore. So, they're going to drink some absinthe. And it's going to take them places. Maybe that's the hallucinogenic element to it, but it also could just be the idea of getting drunk. It is very high alcohol content. Then Absinthe and the sailor sing together, I'm going to hold you tight, I have no choice, I can't return. So Absinthe is going to take control over this person, forming an addiction, their need for it. And the sailor is going to hold it tight because they have this need for it. Really nice double line there. And that's pretty much what the song goes on about. There's a chorus, I think, that shows up a few times. Absinthe says, En route towards the dawn, forever together. Green is the pain, green is the drug. We melt like sugar, which I think is a nice callback since we're still talking about abusive substances. Or I should say abusing substances. Substance abuse. Those words are starting to sound really weird to me now. Should not say them so often. And of course, green is the pain, green is the drug. It is a green drink. Even the next stanza, the sailor says, "Come, whisper words of love, inebriate my soul again. Emerald nectar, let me be mad. As Charon's taken my hand, the compass points to hell." So, bringing up the green element again, emerald nectar, it's a green drink, and he wants to be drunk. Let me be mad. He knows that he's close to death. He says, "Charon's taken my hand, and the compass is pointing towards hell. I've done bad things in my life. Maybe that's why they drink." And that's pretty much what the song is about. There is 8 more stanzas ahead of us, but the general idea is that it's this dance. The absinthe being alluring to the sailor, from the sailor's perspective, and the absinthe being controlling and dominating from the alcohol's perspective, and jumping back and forth between these two about how one knows that it's destroying the other, and the other wants to be destroyed by it. There are many, many lines about being on death's door, about having one foot in the grave, and it's the idea that at the end, this is how I want to go. Just want to be drinking this stuff. So, the poison of alcohol. We have 2 more groupings here. We're going to listen to tracks 8 and 9, which looks like it's going to be about 10.5 minutes combined. And then we'll do 10, which I believe is going to be the peak of the album. And then 11, which is a short little outro. Let's dive into Pissing on the Score. Kind of punky with the bass kick line and how it does these accented rhythms against the snare. Yeah, this definitely has a core feel to it. A lot more than anything else. Even bringing in some of the classical elements into the guitars is reminding me of progressive metalcore. Yeah, this is definitely my favorite song so far. But it's also very much the least death metal. Those rising harmonics. It almost feels a little Between It Buried and Me aside from the vocals. Yeah, this is just a fun song. I didn't think we'd have anything like that on the album. Nice way to come into this. Yeah, those accented bass kicks are everything. They change so much of the feel of this. The interplay between the piano and violins. Dude, that was wild. Who would have thought they had it in them? And to follow that up with a depressing waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah. The cross stick on the snare is a really nice choice for this. I love the flow of the melody too. It's phrase based rather than bar based. Just the rhythm changes from bar to bar, but it makes sense within the larger phrasing of the 4-bar phrase, I think. I can't take these vocals seriously in this kind of music. It's one of those hurdles I can't get over. Growls just sound ridiculous in ballads like this. Okay, this is quickly taking over as my favorite. But only because it is not metal at all. The echo. This is probably not supposed to be comedic, but to me it's just a hair bit too extra. It's entering a little bit to the realm of camp. Alright, the vocals fit a lot more here. Dude, that range. The bend into, oh, that was so good. Love that transition. I don't know why, but I'm getting a lot of Deer and Grey vibes from this track. Yeah, just gorgeous. Such a good resolution there, too. Ooh. No, just gonna leave it on that. Golly. Man, just left it on a leading chord. Are you kidding me? There is too much tension to just stop the song there. Although maybe that's purposeful. It is called The Day Will Be Gone. And the next song is Embrace the Oblivion. So there might be some connectivity there lyrically. So having a bit of a cliffhanger is probably sound. Yeah, so, what? Aside from the beginning of Monnalisa, the song, I mean, I just got done talking about how the album is pretty consistent in what it does. There really isn't much change to it, much alteration, any dips in intensity. It's just, it kind of runs between 8 and 10 all the time. And as soon as I say that, granted, track 8 doesn't really do much in the realm of intensity alteration, but we do shift quite a far away from the tech death sound that we've had primarily throughout this album into a progressive metalcore sound, which I thought was bonkers and certainly appealed to me a lot more. I've said in the past, and I'll probably say it again many times in the future, I'm not really a metalhead. There's albums, there's songs that are going to click with me, but it's always I enjoy a specific album or song or maybe a band in isolation. Very rarely would I ever say I enjoy all of, you know, progressive metal. It's just I'm not a metalhead like that. And so metalcore really appeals to me because it is metallic, but it's also punky. And I mean, even post-hardcore, I'm a fan of. I like adding punky elements to other things, I suppose. I don't know. Which is weird because I don't like hardcore punk. So, whatever that means about my tastes. But anyways, yeah, like I dig metalcore. I mean, metalcore, I know it kind of got trashed on a lot in the 2000s when melodic metalcore took over. Um, and a lot of people calling it not real metal and stuff like that. But to me, it is kind of a metal light. It appeals to my tastes a lot more than traditional metal does. It is fun. It is bouncy. It's kind of dancey in ways, and it's everything that they brought to the table here with track 8. I mean, it all comes down to, I think, right there at the beginning, just like solidified the atmosphere of this track was the bass and snare. It wasn't the rigidity that I had talked about the entire album, which is, focusing on eighth notes. Focusing on 16th notes with the blast beats and the double bass kicks, or on, skipping every beat for the snare. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes we would have every beat, right? The snare gave us that. But it's about this rigidity, right? The distance between the notes is always the same. They are all 16th notes. They are all quarter notes. That kind of idea. And this introduces some syncopation to it. The bass kick tends to hit around the snare. So it'll come in on the offbeat right before the downbeat that the snare is going to accent. And it's a very hardcore thing to do to give it this punky energy. And a lot of metalcore has incorporated it. Post-hardcore has incorporated it. It is the rhythmic antithesis to what the drummer has been doing for the last 40 minutes of this album. And just as soon as that kicked in, I don't know, I felt revitalized, I felt regenerated, rejuvenated, that's the word I want. I was like, yeah, I'm here for this. Let's see where this goes. I start listening to the riffage, and yeah, that's more metalcore. And it's just like it starts focusing on some texture things, but there's also a lot of dexterity to it. A lot of jumping between really large note gaps, intervals. That's the proper term for it. Um, it is all over the place, and the song is just generally fun, whereas I would describe the rest of this album as serious and technical. And that's not to say that the guitar work and the drum work is less technical here. It still requires proficiency on both instruments, but it just doesn't exude the serious furrowed brow, look how angry we are feel. It's more like, yeah, we're angry, but hey, we want to like dance around with it. We want to do some cool stuff. Here's a bouncy guitar line for you. Look how angry we are. Oh man. Anyways, and so I was like really on board for this. Even some of the sections I felt sounded a lot like Between the Buried and Me, and I even got a little bit of Human Abstract vibe in like a 20-second segment of it as well. They're also progressive metalcore, at least on their first album. It's just, I don't know, it's chaotic in a different way, in a different vibe, a different feel. It isn't happier, it isn't brighter, it's just bouncier, it's more energetic, it's lost some of the weight, some of the brooding element. And I dig it. I really do. And it comes through in everything, except really, honestly, the vocals, which the growl is still a death metal growl. And I guess even Between the Buried and Me kind of has a similar-esque growl, but I feel like they use a higher placement of where like all the compression begins. Whereas this feels very deep and throaty and it feels, I don't know. I'm not a vocal coach. I don't know how to do this stuff. But I just hear it. I know how to describe the sound. I don't know how to make it. I don't know how to tell you where it comes from. It just sounds like it comes from a higher up place. But it's not quite nasally like a black metal harsh would be either. So, I don't know. That's really the only thing that didn't really gain the metalcore element and kind of stuck with the death sound. So would this be called deathcore? I don't think so because it doesn't remind me of um, Lorna Shore. But I'm pretty sure Lorna Shore isn't the only sound of deathcore. I just don't think I've been introduced to a lot of it to really be able to pick out any more bands. Maybe we need a deathcore week so y'all can show me what that's about. Because this does sound like death metal with some hardcore sound to it, and that would be deathcore, right? But for some reason, my brain told me metalcore. Just not my brain, my gut. And I was feeling down here in my core that this is metalcore, not deathcore. But y'all can let me know about that distinction in the description if you'd like. All I know was that this was a blast of fresh air, and just I loved it. And as far as their traditional sound, this is my favorite track on the album. Now we go to a very non-traditional sound though, and we enter another favorite track of the album, The Day Will Be Gone. This one is very somber. Um, Although it doesn't really feel sad, it just feels dark, right? And I think part of that's going to be due to, I mean, the album has been pretty, what's the word when you're misanthropic? There's a couple of songs that say, hey, there's some good people out there, right? There's some people who aren't idiots, who don't use religion to justify their actions, and who do good stuff. But I get a very big anti-human vibe from this album. It's just like humans are garbage and the earth will be better without us, without explicitly stating that. And so the idea that the day will be gone, humanity is going to get wiped out, earth will be fine, it will be a sad day, might be overwhelming to those, if we could possibly still feel an emotion after moving on to the next realm. But it's really going to be sad. And I think that's kind of what this is. It's heavy, but it's not really sad. It is elegiac in a sense. It is a song for the dead, but not necessarily one of mourning. But it is a waltz, a dark, slow waltz ballad, which I thought was a very interesting choice for them. It is also primarily our soprano vocalist, and I dig that. We get to hear a little bit more of how she can utilize a multitude of vocal styles. We do have more of the operatic stuff, but we do have a more forward placed version of that with a little bit less vibrato. It is not necessarily a rock style delivery of vocals, but it is very far from the traditional operatic stuff that she's presented this entire album, though we do get some of that as well, and we get to hear some of her range, which is just wild. She hit some crazy notes up there with full body, full power, full vibrato, just like, jeez, impressive stuff. But this is a place for her to shine a little bit, showcase some of her width and skills, just like the guitars and drums have been able to do this entire time. We also get a bit more of a focus on the bass work, which is very cool. We've heard the bass a few times now since the album started. I really love the bass tone. I wish we could hear a little bit more of it, but much like the vocals, it makes sense for them to be on the simpler side just because typically there's a lot of layers going on. And it's also pretty traditional for death metal to just put the bass alongside the guitar. And as the guitars over the years have gotten lower and lower and lower and emphasized not only just down tuning, which I don't know if they down tune, but as far as EQ goes, emphasizing more of the low end of the instruments, there's just less room for the bass to shine if you're still using that traditional composition of death metal. What else did I want to say? Oh, yeah, dude. Okay, so Bryan, right? The first half of the song, I could not get over the growls against the somber waltz. It just never quite clicked for me, and it sounded really campy and extra and ridiculous. And that's fine. That's just my opinion, man. So, like, maybe you enjoyed it. That's a subjective take. Regardless, though, eventually the song just started to get a bit too much for me. There was one part where there was an echo on, I think, both of the vocalists at the same time, and it's supposed to make it sound like this word or syllable was like really present and just bouncing off these walls. And I think it's supposed to imply the idea of memory fading, or memory, getting put into the back of your mind. You don't really think about it anymore. It's sort of fading away, but ready to be unlocked with when you like smell something, or somebody says the word obnoxious in the future, and you're like, that reminds me of a sad time. But yeah, it just felt a little overdone for me. That was another place where I gave a little chuckle. I think they work if you take everything at face value. It was just a little too overdone, and maybe it wouldn't be that way on a second listen now that I know they're there. But the back half of this track absolutely worked. I loved everything it did. The growth into the distorted guitars coming in, the extra layers of harshes, her sending her voice off into the stratosphere. She's all of it, just the weight, the emotion, rising the intensity up, and keeping it all tasteful. This very easily could have gone into the tech death that they've been playing this whole album, and instead they kept it on the slower side. The intensity came from the harmonic weight and from the timbre. You bring in these big distorted guitars, it's going to sound big and weighty. You don't need to play really fast to make it feel intense. And I think they did a really great job of doing what the song needed and nothing more. So yeah, this group is definitely my favorite. I'm curious where they're going to go from here, though. Are they going to continue on this little streak they have of doing new ideas, or is 10 going to be a return to form and we're going to get a very heavy death metal track? Regardless, I think Veleno is going to... I gotta look up the pronunciation of that. I think I've said it 3 different ways this video. And I know it's not English, so I need to stop pronouncing it like a white dude. Well, like an American dude. I suppose that's more accurate. Uh, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be a calmer instrumental, maybe something along the lines of Praying Mantis's Strategy. I'm going to dive into some lyrics for these two, and we're going to see what the end of the album has in store for us. Track 8, Pissing on the Score. It seems to be about the poison of modern culture. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, I think. But the idea, particularly that the chorus, the second verse, and the and the bridge presents, is that art is something that is dying. At least true art. It is a very much a gatekeepery song, it feels like, art in general. Many of the verses tend to juxtapose the I, the me, the self, presumably the people who make the music for Fleshgod Apocalypse, and juxtaposes them with composers who sell smoke and mirrors, people who make art, music, paintings, dance, anything, film presumably even would fall into this, and it's not artistic at all. It's just garbage designed to sell. The pre-chorus states, I need to stay alive, to shape the archetype, define the undefined, a demiurge at war. Basically saying that I am one who can push art towards the creative ends. I need to stay alive for that. It doesn't necessarily say that no one else can do it, but there is a certainty that I can. An artistic savior is sort of how I view this. I can't quite get behind it. There are parts of this that I think I agree with. On the whole, art is becoming something that mixes the artistic side of things with the financial side. Even looking at film, it's really difficult to create something that is worthwhile and requires a budget. Because if you need money to make something, you're going to bring in the financial element and then it becomes a product for whoever is funding it. The same thing is true for a lot of video games as well, and I assume maybe the same thing happens in the music world as well. After all, your indie bedroom producers don't have the funding to do something like Taylor Swift does. I think funding has a little bit less import to making music than making film, but it's still something that is going to not justify, it's going to alter what you can and cannot do. And so I do think there is an element of this track that is true. I don't necessarily think I would call it the death of art, but there is more of a blurring of the lines between product and artistry today than there was, I don't know, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Maybe there actually isn't, now that I begin to think about it. There are certainly pure forms of doing music, but even going back to the medieval ages, you played what the king thought was good, or you didn't play it anymore. Maybe quite literally. Um, The idea that there are people who are going to bankroll your projects, and if you don't get that, then you don't get to make your projects. The same could even be true in the Renaissance when we had wealthy patrons funding the artistic endeavors of some of the greatest artists and musicians at the time. If you didn't catch the fancy of one of these patrons, someone who owned a bank or something, you were not you were not going to be able to do what you wanted to in the capacity that you would want. So, yeah, maybe this has always been true. Maybe art has never really been true entirely. There's always been an element of product to it, unless you're doing it just for yourself. But there's the other side of this. It feels very gatekeepery. What I make is good, real art, and what other people make is not good, real art. And he says in verse 2 that the deaf take refuge in chromatic illusions to hide the emptiness. These self-styled composers barely sell smoke. Dried is the pen as much as the inkwell. It's not just that we've run out of ink in the pen, we've run out of ink in the inkwell. We can't even, the ink is a metaphor for creative thought in general. So there's just no creative thought. Affected by a creative drought, and blank remains the parchment, once florid land of beauty. We used to have so much beautiful artwork. Now we just don't anymore. Now everything's vapid. I can't get behind that reading of it, but it is not just a way that I perceive it. It's present everywhere in here. The bridge, art is a serious thing. You can't dishonor it. Come earn your fame through the highest sacrifice. Come immolate your life. And again, I kind of get that. Some of the best art is the ones where you take a piece of yourself and throw it out into the world. But that doesn't mean that that's the only way to make good art. Yeah, I think I've spent a lot of time on the lyrics here, but I mean, it really struck a nerve. I don't like gatekeeping ever. That's why I come to this channel with a critical, not cynical mind. That's why that's the tagline of the channel. That's why I don't allow comments in the videos if people are just going to sit there and trash talk. You don't like something, fine. Tell me why you don't like it, but don't say this is garbage. That's not an argument. And it's totally subjective in a way that isn't compatible with conversation, with argument. I can't learn anything about the music or you through that sentence. It becomes worthless. And so gatekeeping just kind of lines up with that. There is no bad music. There's just music you don't like, music you don't understand. I mean, art is subjective at the end of the day. Who is this person to say that they are the arbiter of good art and that everyone around them is just making trash? I can't get behind that. I really can't. The day will be gone. I think I read incorrectly. I had an implied all in there. The day will all be gone. But I don't think that's necessarily what the song is about. My original hypothesis was that the album was fixated on a misanthropic view of humans, that we poison ourselves and the people around us on a singular isolated level and on a larger group level. All of humanity is poison. And so the end of this album is the death of humanity. I don't think that's true anymore. And I'm not sure what Embrace the Oblivion is going to lean into, but the day will be gone, I think, is a general song about accepting death. Not necessarily a day that humanity is wiped out. Whatever your day is, this is the song about that. It speaks about life in the first chorus. and then death in the second chorus. I think that's a beautiful way to go about it. It also takes a perspective on life that I fancy from time to time. I think I've even brought it up on the channel occasionally, that life is the oddity of existence, or non-existence technically, that we were for billions of years non-existent, and when we pass, we will be non-existent for another billions of years. The 100 or so years that we exist alive is the anomaly. It's the oddity to how we are. It says there's a back and forth. We have the female vocalist and then the growls, right? And they tend to present two sides of the same coin. So the clean vocals say life, the day will be gone. And the harsh vocals say life, the greatest of all lies. That's sort of how things go from here. The idea, though, is that we can step into the unknown and free ourselves from all the fears. The peace that we wanted on earth is present to us on the other side. We need to return back to the place we belong, the place of our immortality. So again, to me, that's the returning to non-existence, to stardust, whatever you want to call it, but the state we were in prior to being alive. And then chorus 2 speaks about escaping some of the pain, living forever as non-existence, a sleep of no return. It says where everything is clear. Everything makes sense when you don't exist. This kind of stuff. So it's trying to find a bit of a silver lining to death and looking at the positivity of all that. Not necessarily in a way that would encourage moving towards death in a suicidal manner, but one that simply tries to make peace with, well, as the outro says, death is nothing but life. It is the other side of the coin. You can't have life without death. It does call it, though, however, the mother of all fears and the despair of all mankind, which I think is true. Most people have a fear of death. It's the unknown. The unknown is scary. And unlike most things, I don't think this is going to be one of the questions we can get answered. Science can explain a lot of things to us. Can't explain what's on the other side once we close our eyes for that final time. And that is a scary thing. And I like how the song kind of holds on to both of these truths, that it is peace, and it is the state we were in prior, but that doesn't make it any less scary. They are comforting words. They might comfort a little bit, but universally, people are afraid of death. That's just part of the human condition. So, kind of captures all that. This is it. Y'all ready? I'll wrap this up. This will take us to about 250, and then I'll talk about it, do some lyrics. Video will probably be over about 3:10, 3:15, and didn't I call it at the beginning this would be about a 3-hour video? I'm getting pretty good at that. Alright, time to embrace the Oblivion. We're back to the rigidity of the death metal, but it's even heavier than it before. Now what's interesting is we have the guitar squeals, we have the violin squeals, and we have that metallic clanging that were present in Fury, right? That was the beginning of the album. But we do have more syncopated rhythms like we had in track 8. I do like that tremolo pick guitar line melody off on the right. And we're bringing back the 3/4 that we had on, was that Monnalisa? It's really interesting to see these ideas that were isolated to one track all get represented in this final one. Ooh, a sick bend into a guitar solo. That was that Absinthe? There's too many callbacks for this to be accidental. There's a really big ooh, even have a positive twist on it. It's the big epic though to wrap this album up. It's very interesting.
With no regret, we put those who want to death. Embrace the oblivion ourselves.
And a really big drop back up to 11. Yeah. I kind of wish we had stuck with that a little longer. Fleshed it out a little bit, stayed down there for a while. This feels very deathcore. So many vocal layers. And the strings giving us just enough syncopation to give us a good sense of groove against the consistency in the drums. Kind of cliche, very traditional way of ending something like this. Just crossfade the melody onto a piano version of it. But I think they've earned it. They've done a lot of crazy stuff on this album, and many of the endings have been heavy and rushed. I'll take this. And then the octave shift. Oh, a little bit of harmonic shift too, right? Introducing more tension. And it's a transition to our outro. Okay, yeah, absolutely deserved. So good. That's how you take something cookie cutter or iterative and you make it your own. Well, you can absolutely hear who the pianist studied under, who their favorite classical composer was. Yeah. It's not quite exclusive as far as influence, but there's a lot of Beethoven in here. Not a full resolution, but I'll take it. Given what the album's been about, I don't think I could have expected that to have gone more towards a major uptick and ended more harmoniously. So yeah, beautiful end to the album. Also, that last track is Veleno, which is Italian, and that's how you pronounce it. Emphasis on that second syllable. I don't really think my thoughts are any different than what I spoke about during that track. It's a lot of ideas from other songs that came back. We had the compressed belting cleans that we had from track 2. We had some of the aggressive piano work from Fury. We had the dip from Monnalisa. There was a guitar lick in there I think came from Absinthe. And the cool thing was, it's not like they took a riff or a phrase and then just slopped it in here. No, it was like this was the general idea that built this riff. We're going to reuse that general idea here. Oh, Absinthe was the wailing guitar. It bends into the note to start the guitar solo as a transition. So good. It showed up there in Embrace the Oblivion again. And it was just like, oh, this came from that. This came from that. This idea was present there too. And again, it wasn't just copy paste. It was the underlying structure was then utilized as the blueprint for a new section. It just shared so many characteristics. And I absolutely love this. It's a way of bringing the entire album together. This was very death metal, very classical, but also had a little bit of the fun bounciness that we saw in track 8. It had the mellowness that we saw in track 9. It's just such a perfect culmination of everything, which is what an album ender should be. Find a way to wrap the album up and bring together all your themes, musical and lyrical. And this track does it so effortlessly. It's just absolutely gorgeous. We had some of the. Do we have the cleans in here? The operatic? I don't think we had the operatic cleans in Embrace the. Oh, I was at the end. Oh, and that too, it's not just a culmination of everything, it's also stacking layers until we have a big moment at the end of the track. So not only is the album doing the, peaks and valleys thing, where each peak is higher than the last until you get to the final peak, which is the peak of the album, or the peak of the song, following the ideas of good storytelling, but it also does that within the entire album. This is the peak of the album, and the song itself also has rising and falling peaks until it hits its own peak, which acts as both the peak for itself and the highest point of the album. And again, it seems so effortless. Like they didn't even have to try to do this. And that's not to diminish the effort that went into this. I mean, not just the album itself, but all the years that went into mastering the craft, and this as a result of it, and probably the months and years of composition and practice and recording that went into the creation of this. I mean, this is no small feat, but they make it seem like it just oozes out of them. It's just the natural way these songs should have gone. It almost makes it feel like this is just the way it was. This was the first draft. I started playing this riff and I didn't stop. And then that was our first song. That kind of feel. Everything just naturally works. And I highly doubt that's how it went. But for it to feel that way, that it's not a series of ideas, that everything is built off of what came before it. It's masterfully composed. And then, of course, the ending. I kind of already said my piece on this, but it's sort of cliched to take the riff that you're working with, regardless of what instrument it is, and crossfade the same riff onto a piano. There's a lot of songs in the rock and metal realms that have done this over the ages. But one, I feel like this was earned, and maybe the other ones are too. I tend to know them in singles, not from within albums, so maybe they are earned within the larger work that they're placed within. But this one is certainly earned after having so many songs. As I talked about, the endings barely have any silence to them at all. Usually you just get a little bit of reverb that crosses from one track to the next, and then you're in the next idea. It's what led to the fast, frantic pacing of this album. But here we slow it down and we allow a song to have a natural ending to it. I was fine with it on that level. I had made peace, and then they flipped the script and said also, this is the transition to the final track. Personally, I think I probably would have just put Veleno on the end of Embrace the Oblivion and called it an 11-minute song. I don't really understand the purpose of making it an isolated track, but regardless, it was a neat little twist there for me and a surprise ending because Veleno, of course, is just piano. So it introduces the outro of the album as well. Just so good. I don't think the final bit of lyrics are going to change much about my impression of this, so here's my final thoughts on the album. It is phenomenally put together. Not every single second of every single song was necessarily my cup of tea, and in general, the faster death metal stuff is sort of it's not great for me. There are some sections I liked a lot better than others. There are some songs, like Carnivorous Lamb, that kind of focused more on the metal. Not my favorite one there. And the growls, of course, I would have liked something else in place of those, but that all comes down to personal tastes. That is to say, though, that I doubt I'll be listening to this album again, although tracks 8 and 9 I might revisit in isolation just because of how fun they are. Well, 8's fun, 9 is just really well put together. But aside from my personal tastes, this is just, I mean, honestly, I'd probably put it close to a masterpiece, or as close as I know as I would, because I don't think I call anything a masterpiece. Art is created by people, humans. We are flawed, so the art we create is flawed. I don't believe there's anything as perfect. And masterpiece, I think, is a really, really big word. It's one of those things I want to save. You know, I don't just call everything a masterpiece. Not like I call everything beautiful. I kind of feel like that word has lost meaning for the channel because anytime I hear something remotely good to listen to, I'm like, dang, that's beautiful. But masterpiece, it's just one of those words I want to allow it to have its power. Especially since to me it does mean perfection. But I really don't have any faults with this album from a totally objective level. It's not my cup of tea. I probably won't return to it. There's a lot of sounds on here I'm just not a big fan of in my current taste in music. But the composition is all really solid. And the way that it wraps up is immaculate. It really is just, I know I just got done saying, you know, I don't talk about things in perfection, but immaculate's a good word. And honestly, the entire tracks of 10 and 11, I have no faults for. They are perfect as far as what their execution is, their intention. Bringing the album together, revisiting many of the ideas of isolated tracks, creating a peak for the album, and then the twist ending of track 10 into 11, and then a way to wrap the album up. I have zero complaints about how any of that came together, even if I didn't necessarily enjoy all the sounds. So I really, at the end of the day, I have my complaints with it, but I would give it nothing but praise and the highest recommendation to anybody who enjoys death metal, honestly. It's just, I really enjoyed my time with it, which is not something I can say about music that I would not want to revisit all the time. Let's hit some lyrics for Embracing the Oblivion. We'll see where that takes me, and I might give some thoughts on Veleno as far as thematics and how the sounds of that song work with the way that the album ended lyrically. They're firing on all cylinders here at the end. Embrace the Oblivion is what I thought The Day Will Be Gone is about. This is the misanthropic one. Talks about humans vomiting on Eden, unconcerned ignorance, we're a plague on the earth. The pre-chorus states very clearly, we are the enemies, the filthy breed, the apocalypse, the end. Verse 2 says, deny the future and the past. In anarchy we rot with no perspective, rapidly drain the soil that gave us birth. We got heaven, we turned it into hell. Decay with no remorse, cursing posterity, reckless exhaust every kind of resource. So we just destroy this planet that we got, and we don't care. Just drain everything, exhausting every natural resource. Chorus 2 asks for an Anatolian mother goddess, Cybele, to cleanse this race with fire. Very extreme, but you can certainly understand where this guy's coming from with his perspective coming up to this point and his views on humanity. It makes sense that this extremity would be where they go from here. And the chorus and the outro both say, with no regret, we embrace the oblivion of ourselves, putting this world to death. So there's your misanthropic track that I was expecting a couple songs ago, but ended up landing here. The idea is embracing the oblivion, but it's not one that is presented or is pushed onto us, right? Like, death is an oblivion pushed onto us. We can't escape that whether we want it or not. We're going to see that nothingness, that void, as we pass. However, this speaks the oblivion of humanity. The idea that we embrace it. It's not just so much that some humans will do garbage stuff and be poison for themselves, for others, for the world, but it's that we as a group embrace it. Embrace might not be specifically the right word for it, but if nothing else, there's a lot of apathy going on as well. You read about something on your social media feed, something bad's happening and we need to stop it, and you're like, yeah, you scroll to the next one and it's a dog in a baby suit yapping with a pacifier, and you're like, oh, how cute, and you've forgotten about the thing that humanity has done that needs some course correcting of sorts. There are certainly people who will fight to preserve what needs to be preserved, to make things better. But there's also a lot of people who embrace the negativity and many more who are apathetic towards it. And so, this song ends with a piano solo that is ultimately a bit sorrowful but happy. There's an uplifting element to it and a beauty to it. And I think this is supposed to represent the oblivion itself. Humanity being wiped out, and the general human consciousness understanding only the void and the weight that has been lifted off of them because of that, and the way that nature can go on about its life without this, as they stated, plague upon it. Line number 3, we are the plague upon the earth. And I think that's why there's some hope and beauty and positivity in that piano line, even though it is about the extinction, the eradication of humanity. So, yeah, on just another level, the entire album comes together there at the end. Oh, even better, too, just to put this to another level, a lot of this album has been about venom and poison and trying to speak against it, right? Drugs are bad. They ruin your life. Don't do them. Why can't I think of any of the other ones? I know we had the alcohol one. Oh, yeah. Undeserved pity is bad. Don't don't give people this attention. Unrequited love. Don't do that. Find other ways to, put your energy towards stuff like that. The whole art thing from track 8 still kind of goes over my head a little bit if I'm the only one who makes good art. But I like how all this culminates in, maybe it's not just individual venoms, but humanity as a whole is a venom. And it really takes it from all these little pieces to just like going up to like 10. It went from like 3 to 10 in the course of 2 songs. It was like, actually, you know what? It's all trash. Wipe it out. Cleanse it with fire. Oh, this guy. All right. Those are my thoughts. Fleshgod Apocalypses. Oh yeah, Veleno. Let me know what you thought of this album. If there was anything that stood out to you, anything you'd like to add on to what I said, or correct me on your own general thoughts, opinions, and perspectives about it, put all that stuff down in the description box. Above that is a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up today. I'll be back tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. UTC. Yeah, that's right. We're gonna do a live stream. It goes for 2 hours. You can jump in whenever you want. You don't have to be there right at the start. We just hang out, chat about stuff. Language pops up a lot. I don't know why. We get fixated on words and origins of words. We get sidetracked, but we also listen to a lot of music. Check out some new stuff and discuss what's going on in some of that. It's very light on the analysis, but it's a good time. Just a good little hangout session. So drop on by if you're interested in that. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.